Okay, calm down.
Well, I wanted to give Jake Tapper some credit because he, of course, Dana is not the only one. We shouldn't invisibilize or erase him. So here's a segment that Jake Tapper did, which airs claims that have been totally debunked. And of course, he never corrected it. Let's just take a look.
Lenore introduced us to another rescue volunteer who went to other parts of Israel that day, David Bader. His first stop was Sderot. What I saw there, he tells us, people strewn, dead bodies, dozens. At the Sha'ar HaNegev junction, I counted, there were 24 bodies, he says. There was also the body of a boy that was thrown, the stroller of the baby. Why? Why would you kill him? He tells us that Kfar Aza was like a destroyed cemetery. Dead, injured, blood everywhere in the houses, in the yards, on the street. You can't understand what I saw there, he says. It's impossible to understand. He remembers a family that had been driving in a car until terrorists killed them. The children were charred, just charred, he says. What could a child do to an adult, he asks. He was a baby, strapped into his car seat inside the car. He guessed that the terrorists took a firearm, shot and killed the members of the family, and then, with a knife, cut their throats. David responds like this to skeptics. It's a shame that those people didn't come there to see what happened on that Black Saturday, he responds. Get it out of my stomach, out of my head, everything that happened. Why do we deserve this? Dozens dead, the smell. Even now, it's still with me. I want the entire world to know what Hamas did, he says. Children were killed, small children, kids that didn't even know how to say dada or mama. They didn't even know how to say it.
So that's just one.
Is in relation to anything that the Israeli government or military is doing. But these actions provide the context as to why the Israeli government has decided, with overwhelming Israeli public support, that they cannot allow Hamas to be able to carry out any future attacks on the Israeli people.
Again, he's doing exactly what Dana Bash did, right? He's saying, I'm going to cite these atrocities, which have been debunked. Of course, there were atrocities committed on October 7th, 100%. We know that. But there weren't these particular stories of the burnt babies, the beheaded babies, the rape. But he says, this has nothing to do with what the Israeli government is doing, but it explains why they have to do what they're doing. He basically says that.
Yeah, and I mean that's a textbook case right there. I mean he is he's doing the entire mathematical formula for you.
Right.
Hamas did these awful things, and not only the awful things they actually did, but they also did these other even more awful things that were not true.
Right.
And therefore, now you understand why we have to do this to Gaza.
Right.
And he just lays it out there directly. And at the same time, you see the way that he humanizes Israeli victims with emotion in his eyes. Never, ever the case for Palestinian victims, who are exponentially more in numbers. And this is all also a part of the ISISification of Hamas, right? You have to make the threat look even bigger than it is in order to justify the disproportionate response of the Israelis. So, Hamas breaks out of the prison on October 7th. It overcomes and defeats the Israeli military around the Gaza Strip and in much of southern Israel. In the process, it kills a bunch of civilians unlawfully in its attacks. If that and Israel in its response kills a lot more Israel. I don't mean more than but kills many Israeli civilians with its Hannibal Directive and its massive response, with Apache helicopters and so on, fire missiles, everything else. Now, if they had told that story, that sounds like war, right? So instead, they had to tell another story about 40 beheaded babies and babies cut out of their mothers' abdomens, and mass systematic rape of all of the girls, and mutilation of women's breasts, and children hung on clotheslines, and children put in ovens, all of which has been completely debunked as false fabricated propaganda for genocide, because that sounds like ISIS, right? And then, with this principle of accusation in the mirror, there have not been beheaded Israeli babies on October 7th. There have been a lot of beheaded Palestinian babies by the Israelis since then. The first was reported in the Western corporate media, the latter wasn't. There has not been systematic rape of Israelis on October 7th. There has been systematic rape of Palestinian detainees since and before then. The lie was reported in Western media. The true story was not reported in Western media. All of it is about building a narrative that will allow continued Western support for the genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity that are happening in Gaza and in the West Bank. Pay attention, because as events increase more and more in the West Bank, you're going to see the same kind of trends coming out of this complicit Western media.
You've been so generous with your time. I know you have to go. We have to bring on our next segment. But before that, we didn't get time. We didn't have time to really dig into this. But just summarize your excellent piece that you also wrote at Mondo Weiss about how no, Israel does not have the right to self-defense.
Or maybe we can on another day have a discussion about this, because it's very much
Yes.
involved. But
Yeah.
what I point out in the article is that every Western politician and complicit media personality loves to follow every atrocity committed by the Israelis by saying, well, we believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. And what I said is that's actually a double lie, because on the one hand, under international law, Israel does not have an Article 51 right to self-defense in the territories that it occupies, including Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights. It does not have a right to self-defense there, first of all. And under international law, the Palestinian people do have a right of self-defense against colonialism, apartheid, foreign occupation, and so on. And then, the other half of the lie that is told when these Western politicians just repeat this mantra over and over again is that the things that they're trying to justify are not under international law justified by claims of self-defense. Like, for example, genocide, to be sure, crimes against humanity, but even individual war crimes like the destruction of hospitals or torture or the siege, collective punishment. These things, saying that Israel has a right to defend itself has nothing to do with these crimes, because self-defense is not a justification for those crimes under international law. So we've all gotten used to just accepting that as the sort of opening preface every time there is a crime committed by Israel. Well, we believe that Israel has a right to defend itself. No, it doesn't. The Palestinian people in the occupied territories have a right to defend themselves. Israel has a right to defend itself in Israel. It does not have a right of self-defense in the occupied territories. And the Palestinian people do, as a matter of international law. So I just thought it was important to set that out in legal terms and in moral terms as well. And I lay out the metaphor there that you can't, a criminal can't take over somebody's home, brutalize the family, kill some members of the family, move in themselves into the home, and then, if the family fights back, use self-defense as a defense for having murdered members of the family. And international law is structured the same way.